The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town, its silhouette a jagged scar against the twilight sky. For Jeff Vahn, it was meant to be a sanctuary, a fresh start after the storm that had ripped his life asunder. His divorce from Maggie had been brutal, a drawn-out battle for the soul of their daughter, Jenny. Now, with Maggie gone, the house felt less like a refuge and more like a cage, each creak and groan a whisper of the past he desperately wanted to escape. He remembered the last phone call with Maggie, the venom in her voice, the threat of losing Jenny forever. Then, the news a hit and run, a senseless tragedy that left him reeling. Now, the weight of grief was compounded by guilt, a gnawing feeling that he could have prevented it all. The funeral was a blur of faces, of forced condolences and accusatory stares from Maggie's family. Her father, Paul Rivers, a man of granite and cold fury, had made his intentions clear. He would fight for custody of Jenny, convinced that Jeff was an unfit father. Jenny, his sweet, vibrant Jenny, had retreated into herself, a silent, haunted echo of the girl she once was. He tried to reach her, to comfort her, but his words seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. Her big, brown eyes, once full of laughter, were now clouded with a sorrow that mirrored his own. He felt helpless, adrift in a sea of grief and uncertainty. Desperate for any semblance of normalcy, Jeff reached out to an old friend, hoping for work. He was a comic book artist, but his career had stalled, a casualty of his fractured life. A small job at a local comic book company was all he could find, a lifeline in a sea of despair. With the new job came Samantha Nally, a babysitter recommended by a friend. Samantha was young, eager, and seemed genuinely fond of Jenny. He hired her full-time, grateful for the help, for the chance to focus on work, to escape, even for a few hours each day, the suffocating atmosphere of the house. But the house had other plans. It started subtly, with whispers in the dead of night, shadows flickering in the periphery of his vision. He dismissed them as stress, as grief-induced hallucinations. But then came the nightmares. Visions of spectral figures lurking in the corners of his bedroom, their eyes burning with malevolent intent. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, convinced that he wasn't alone. One night, he awoke to find himself in a trance, his hand moving across a sketch pad, creating images of grotesque creatures he had never seen before. He didn't remember drawing them, but there they were, staring back at him from the page, their eyes filled with a terrifying sentience. The creatures from his nightmares began to manifest in the house. He would see them in the reflections of mirrors, hear their whispers in the wind that howled through the eaves. They seemed drawn to Jenny, their shadowy figures hovering around her as she slept. He tried to rationalize it, to explain it away as sleep paralysis or a vivid imagination fueled by grief. But deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. The house was haunted, and the spirits within were not benevolent. One evening, Jenny started acting strangely. She spoke in a voice that wasn't her own, reciting phrases that echoed Maggie's words from their last argument. Her eyes turned cold, her face contorted with a hatred that chilled Jeff to the bone. "You took her away from me," Jenny rasped, her voice a distorted imitation of Maggie's. "Now, I'm going to take everything from you." Jeff stumbled back, his mind reeling. Was it possible? Could Maggie's spirit be manipulating Jenny, seeking revenge from beyond the grave? The activity in the house escalated. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the temperature plummeted without warning. Jeff felt a constant, oppressive presence, a malevolent force that watched his every move. One afternoon, Jenny suffered a severe allergic reaction to her food. Her throat closed up, her face turned blue, and she struggled to breathe. Jeff frantically called 911, his heart pounding with terror. He managed to administer an EpiPen just as she lost consciousness. At the hospital, the doctors stabilized her, but the incident left Jeff shaken to his core. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't an accident, that someone had deliberately poisoned her food. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Maggie's spirit was behind it all. She was using the other ghosts in the house, manipulating them to torment him and Jenny, seeking retribution for her untimely death. He had to get them out of the house, away from her vengeful grasp. He decided to move upstate, closer to Paul Rivers. He knew it would be difficult, facing Maggie's father, but he was willing to do anything to protect Jenny. Perhaps, with Paul's help, they could find a way to appease Maggie's spirit, to bring peace to the tormented house. To his surprise, Paul was receptive to the idea. He saw the fear in Jeff's eyes, the genuine concern for Jenny's well-being. The custody battle dissolved into an amicable agreement, a shared understanding that Jenny's happiness was paramount. Jeff felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that he was finally taking control of his life. He even earned a promotion at work, his talent as an artist finally being recognized. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that things might actually get better. But the darkness was not so easily dispelled. A few weeks after the move, a private investigator contacted Paul. He claimed to have new information about Maggie's death, evidence that pointed to a suspect other than a random hit-and-run driver. Paul, fueled by a renewed sense of vengeance, confronted Samantha, Jenny's babysitter. The confrontation escalated, and in a moment of blind rage, Samantha pushed Paul from the second-story balcony. Jeff arrived at the house to find Paul lying on the ground, unconscious but alive. Samantha stood over him, her eyes wide with terror and a strange, unsettling mix of adoration. "I did it for you, Jeff," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I loved you, and she was standing in our way. I had to protect you." Jeff's blood ran cold. Samantha confessed to killing Maggie, driven by a twisted obsession. She admitted to poisoning Jenny's food, believing that Jenny was keeping her from getting closer to Jeff. The truth was a horrifying revelation, a nightmare come to life. But as he looked into Samantha's eyes, he realized that she was not the only one consumed by darkness. The house itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The shadows deepened, the temperature plummeted, and the air crackled with an unseen force. Jeff felt a presence behind him, a cold, familiar touch on his shoulder. He turned to see Maggie's ghost, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. But her anger was not directed at him. It was focused on Samantha. "You took everything from me," Maggie's ghost hissed, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the house. "Now, I'm going to take everything from you." The other ghosts in the house, the tormented spirits that had haunted Jeff's nightmares, surged forward, their shadowy figures coalescing around Samantha. They were drawn to Maggie's rage, fueled by her desire for vengeance. Samantha screamed, her eyes wide with terror as the ghosts descended upon her. Jeff watched in horror as they tore at her, their spectral hands ripping at her flesh, their chilling whispers driving her to madness. He tried to stop them, to pull Samantha away from the ravenous spirits, but he was powerless. He was a spectator in a nightmare, trapped in a house possessed by vengeful ghosts. Finally, with a final, agonizing scream, Samantha collapsed to the floor, her body lifeless, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The ghosts receded, their shadowy figures dissolving into the darkness, leaving Maggie's spirit standing alone in the center of the room. Jeff stared at Maggie's ghost, his heart pounding with fear and a strange sense of sorrow. He had loved her once, with all his heart, but now she was a vengeful specter, consumed by rage and hatred. Jenny appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. She walked slowly towards Maggie's ghost, her hand outstretched. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Maggie's ghost turned to Jenny, her eyes softening, her face contorting with a flicker of remorse. She reached out to touch Jenny, her spectral fingers brushing against her cheek. "I'm doing this for you, my darling," she whispered, her voice filled with a heartbreaking sadness. "I'm protecting you from the evil in this world." Jenny reached up and hugged Maggie's ghost, her small arms wrapping around the ethereal figure. "I miss you, Mommy," she sobbed. "I want you to come home." As Jenny hugged Maggie's ghost, the house began to tremble. The walls groaned, the windows rattled, and the air crackled with energy. Jeff felt a surge of power, a force that threatened to tear the house apart. Suddenly, Jenny slipped, her foot catching on a loose floorboard. She stumbled towards the open attic window, her arms flailing, her eyes wide with terror. Jeff lunged forward, his hand outstretched, desperately trying to grab her. He managed to catch her hand, but her weight pulled him forward, sending him hurtling towards the open window. For a moment, they hung suspended in the air, their bodies dangling precariously above the ground. Jeff looked down, his heart pounding with terror. The ground seemed miles away, the fall certain to be fatal. Then he felt a surge of energy, a force that lifted them upwards, slowing their descent. He looked up to see Maggie's ghost, her eyes filled with a desperate determination, She was using her power to save them, to prevent them from falling to their deaths. They landed on the ground with a soft thud, unharmed. Jeff looked at Jenny, his heart overflowing with gratitude and relief. She was safe. They were both safe. He looked up at the house, at the attic window, but Maggie's ghost was gone. Her spirit had finally found peace, her vengeance fulfilled, her love for her daughter triumphant. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as first responders raced towards the house. Jeff knew that the nightmare was finally over. The house, with all its darkness and torment, would soon be behind them. But he would never forget the ghosts, the vengeful spirits that had haunted his life, the love and loss that had shaped his destiny. He would carry the memories with him, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world, and the power of love to overcome even the most terrifying of evils.